His initiating guru. His initiating guru is His Holiness Dhanavir Goswami Maharaj. He has been in Rupanuga Vedic College in USA, Kansas since 2001 till 2008. Apart from Kansas, he was also in Athens, Greece. He did various temple services, pujari services, and eventually Sankirtana also. And since 2008 till 2015, Maharshi Prabhu has been in BBT Sanskrit school at Govardhan, Vrindavan, studied under Gopi Parnadana Prabhu expertise. He studied Sanskrit, he studies BBT book production service. And since 2015, he is actually working for Australia, New Zealand BBT in the book production service and in Sanskrit translations. As far as I know, the most recent project that he's working under, but he can say more, was that Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that is coming in its full version as a BBT version. So that is the little introduction. Apart from that, Maharshi Prabhu has studied linguistics at Charles University in Prague. He is finishing his master's degree right now. And of course, he is also a father and married to a wonderful devotee from South India. And they've been residing in Czech Republic since 2016, as far as I remember. All right, so Maharshi Prabhu, if you would like to turn on your video cam, and hopefully the Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Venu-Madhurya Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Nice to see your nice face.
Yes, devotees are shy to show their faces, but they do listen.
No problem whatsoever. It's fine. I'm used to that. Yeah, I'm definitely a father, and you might hear that in the background throughout the class, for which I apologize. I hope it's not going to get too long. Okay. Venu-Madhurya Prabhu, tell me how clearly my volume comes through, whether you can understand me clearly.
It's not bad. I mean, it can be a little better. Maybe it's my volume. I'll just check.
Okay, I'll try it with earphones. And
I can hear it, but
if you have a hard time understanding me, you just interrupt me and tell me. So otherwise, what's the point? Let's see whether this will work better. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's actually better. I think so. What do you think, devotees? Is it better with earphones?
Very good.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I guess we'll get going. I thank you so much for having me today. I'm basically just a youth or a guy from Central Europe, Czech Republic, and I'm happy to be able to meet you, the wonderful Gita Nagari devotees. I've heard a lot about you from His Holiness Devamrita Swami, who is my boss at the BBT, also from Kaishori Mataji and other devotees who lived and served there. So it's my honor, it's my pleasure. And Venu-Madhurya Prabhu told me that I should sing Jarada Madhava myself and then recite the verse. And so we can get the class started if it's okay, Prabhuji. Yeah, okay, let's do it. We'll finish around in about an hour. I will not go on for very long. Okay, so Jai. Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopinjana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopinjana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Jaradha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijanna Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya Shuttara Shutta Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya Shuttara Shutta Shri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Nama Acharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्री वासुदेव गौर भक्तवृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपी गो श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की जय श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय श्री मायापुर धाम की जय गंगा मय यमुना मई की जय भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की जय समवेता भक्त वृंद की जय All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. So, you are reading the wonderful 29th chapter of, or you have been reading at Gita Nagari, the nice 29th chapter of the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And Venu-Madhurya Prabhu told me that today we are going to be reciting and then also talking about the 46th verse from this chapter. So I will read the Sanskrit, the word-for-word translations, the translation of the verse, and also Srila Prabhupada's purport. After which, with your kind permission, I will talk a little bit about this verse. But the majority of my talk I would like to dedicate to Sri Madhvacharya. I guess in America, in the US, his appearance day is today. As per the Czech calendar in Czech Republic, it will be tomorrow. And Sri Madhva is a significant acharya in our line. And perhaps his life story and his teachings are not as well known as perhaps some other acharyas like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, Srila Narottama Das Thakur, the six Goswamis, etc. So I would like to talk a little bit more about him, as his life story is also wonderful and inspirational. Okay, we'll start with Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So the Sanskrit goes as follows. Yada yasyanugrhnati Bhagavan Atma Bhavitaha Sajahati Matim Loke Vedecha Parinishtitam. I'll read again. Yada yasyanugrhnati Bhagavan Atma Bhavitaha Sajahati Matim Loke Vedecha Parinishtitam. And the word for word translation is Yada, when, Yasya, whom, Anugrahnati, favors by causeless mercy, Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Atma Bhavitaha, realized by a devotee, Saha, such a devotee, Jahati, gives up, Matim, consciousness, Loke, in the material world, Vede, in the Vedic functions, Cha, also, Parinishtitam, fixed. Translation. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. I'll read the translation again. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. And Srila Prabhupada's purport to this verse. In the previous verse, those who are in knowledge have been described as unable to appreciate the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Similarly, this verse indicates that those who are followers of the Vedic rituals, as well as those who are followers of fruitive activities, are unable to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In these two verses, both the karmis and jnanis are described as unfit to understand him. As described by Sri Rupa Goswami, only when one is completely free from mental speculation and fruitive activity, anyabhyalashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam, can one engage in pure devotional service without being polluted by material desires. The significant word Atma Bhavitaha indicates that the Lord is awakened in one's mind if one constantly thinks of him. A pure devotee is always thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord, Savai Manah Krishna Padara Vindayo. A pure devotee cannot remain a moment without being absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This constant thinking of the Lord is described in Bhagavad-Gita as Satata Yuktanam, always engaging in the Lord's service. Bhajatam Priti Purvakam. This is devotional service in love and affection. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead dictates to the pure devotee from within, the devotee is saved from all material activities. Even the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies are considered material activities, because by such activities, one is simply elevated to other planetary systems, the residential abodes of the demigods. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad-Gita 9:25, Yanti deva vratan devan, pitrin yanti pitrvrataha, bhutani yanti bhutejya, yanti matyajinopi mam. Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. And those who worship ancestors go to the ancestors. And those who worship me will live with me. The word Atma Bhavitaha also indicates that the devotee is always engaged in preaching to deliver conditioned souls. It is said of the 6 Goswamis, Nana Shastra Vicharanaika Nipunau, Sad Dharma Samsthapakau, Lokanam Hitakarinau. A pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always thinking of how the fallen, conditioned souls can be delivered. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, influenced by the merciful devotee's attempt to deliver fallen souls, enlightens the people in general from within by his causeless mercy. If a devotee is blessed by another devotee, he becomes free from karma kanda and jnana kanda activities. As confirmed in Brahma Samhita, Vedeshu Durlabham, the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be realized through karma kanda and jnana kanda. A Durlabham Atma Bhakta, the Lord is realized only by a sincere devotee. This material world, the cosmic manifestation, is created by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the living entities have come here to enjoy themselves. The Vedic instructions guide them according to different regulative principles, and intelligent people take advantage of these instructions. They thus enjoy material life without being disturbed. This is actually illusion, and to get out of this illusion by one's own endeavor is very difficult. The general populace is engaged in material activities, and when people are a little advanced, they become attracted by the ritualistic ceremonies mentioned in the Vedas. However, when one is frustrated in the performance of these ritualistic ceremonies, he again comes to material activities. In this way, both the followers of the Vedic rituals and the followers of material activities are entangled in conditional life. These people get the seed of devotional service only by the goodwill of the Guru and Krishna. This is confirmed in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. When one is engaged in devotional service, he is no longer attracted to material activities. When a man is covered by different designations, he cannot engage in devotional service. One has to become freed from such designative activities, sarvopadhi vinirmuktam, and become pure in order to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead through purified senses. Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam Bhaktir Uchyate. The service of the Lord through purified senses is called Bhakti Yoga, or devotional service. The sincere devotee is always helped by the Super Soul, who resides within the heart of every living entity, as Lord Krishna confirms in Bhagavad-Gita 10:10. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhiyogam tam yena mam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. This is the stage of becoming free from the contamination of the material world. At such a time, a devotee makes friends with another devotee, and his engagement in material activities ceases completely. At that time, he attains the favor of the Lord and loses his faith in material civilization, which begins with Varnashrama Dharma. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of once becoming liberated from the Varnashrama Dharma, the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Lord Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Naham vipro na cha narapatir napi vaishyo na shudro, naham varni na cha grahapatir no vanasthoyatirva. Kintu prodyan nikila paramananda purnam tabdhir, gopi bhattuh padakamalayo dasa dasanudasaha. Quoted from Padyavali 63. I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra. I am not a Brahmachari, Grhasta, Vanaprastha or Sannyasi. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. Sad yada yasyanugrahnati bhagavan atma bhavitaha sajahati matim loke vede cha parinishtitam. All right. So, to speak of a few words on this verse, in this chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Narada Muni explains to King Prachinabarhi, whom he instructs in spiritual knowledge. He explains the allegory that he mentioned in the last chapter, or last chapters, namely the allegory of King Puranjana. And in the previous verses, he was explaining the different parts of this elaborate allegory, which symbolizes a person's life in the conditioned material world, his body and how the soul is situated in body, how the body acts and interacts with its surroundings, and how the person is conditioned by their intelligence, their mind, and their senses. Having explained that, Narada Muni now makes his own conclusion, what he thinks is best for a living entity. And namely, he recommends to King Prachinabarhi to give up all other duties which are in any way materially motivated or based in material consciousness or based on some material principles and sadhanas, and exclusively dedicate himself or oneself to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, namely in devotional service in Bhakti Yoga. That is Narada Muni's conclusion. So an embodied living entity who is born in this material world, as we know, they can only think deeper about their existence and their life and their identity and their situation when they have attained the human body. As Narada Muni explains, the body with the 9 gates and two arms, 2 feet, or 2 legs, because only this human form of life enables deeper thought. The mind and the intelligence are developed to such a degree that they enable some contextual and deeper thinking for the living entity. And even when a living entity is in a human body, they have different ways how to relate to their surroundings and how to think of themselves. Most of the people are not even interested to figure out their own identity and their relationship with the material world or with the world and their surroundings. They don't ask very deep questions about their life. They go with the flow of whatever culture or situation they are born in. And that is why in whatever culture, religion, and the type of society is prevalent in a particular place where a certain person is born, then the vast majority of the local population in that area have a similar concept of life. In the communist countries, it is not surprising that most of the people growing up there will lean towards the ideas of communism to one level or the other, to one degree or the other. Somebody born in, for example, a strongly religious country like a Muslim country will usually adopt that type of thinking. The same with other faiths, like any faith, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, whether it is capitalism, communism, or some other forms of government or forms of faith. The majority of the population will adopt this thinking and kind of go with the social flow, go with the social pressure, and they try to simply somehow go through life, make it be successful within the society they're situated in. And a small percentage of people are deep thinkers who, even at the expense of some discomfort, whether personal discomfort or even social discomfort, they will think deeper about their existence and try to figure out what their situation is, who they are, and what they are doing in this world, whether there's anything beyond this world. And also, these people have, according to their understanding, according to their consciousness, they have several ways of approaching these questions. And we can see that the basic way of acquiring knowledge is simply through our senses, what we can see or hear, what we can personally experience, or hearing from other people who have personally experienced something. That is called in the Sanskrit language, that is called pratyaksha, or direct sensual perception, which, which is very prevalent these days, especially in the Western part of the world, but we could say globally. And the empirical science is solely based on this method of pratyaksha, or direct perception, where we try to directly perceive the world around us and then make conclusions from our observations. And many people these days are engaged in that way of acquiring knowledge. Of course, as the senses of the human body are quite imperfect, so also the knowledge we can receive through direct perception, through pratyaksha, will also only be able to get us to a certain point of knowledge. That's why even when we talk to college-educated people, scientists, or college teachers, educators, professors, they will, who, for example, are studying or researching high advanced physics, mathematics, advanced sciences, and for example, even theoretical physics, then they will tell us that the direct perception of reality will only bring them to a certain point, after which they have to think more and more theoretically about the subject matter. And they say at a certain point, we become more philosophers than researchers, because the instruments we have of acquiring knowledge are not capable of going deeper, revealing more beyond a certain point. So then we have to use our minds and our intelligence, and try to, with the help of logic, try to attain a higher level of knowledge. And in the Sanskrit language, this system is called anumana, or conjecture, and philosophical thinking. But to a large degree, anumana is also based on pratyaksha, because without experiencing certain things, we cannot logically think about them. And because when we identify with our material body and see the world through our material senses and material consciousness, we will only be able to think logically within some material concept. And the things which are not material, or beyond this manifested cosmos, beyond our manifested reality, we will not even be able to think about what they might be, because we have absolutely no concept or experience of them. So that's why, if we do want to go even beyond, if we want to answer these very important questions of who we are, where we come from, and what is beyond, whether there's something beyond what we see and what it might be, pratyaksha and animana are insufficient to fulfill this purpose. And we need some other source of knowledge which will make it possible for us to go deeper into the subject matter and understand. And that third method is in the Vedic civilization, it is called pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda. Shabda, or the power of knowledge received through sound, or an oral message. So naturally, if we are supposed to be hearing from someone about higher topics which are beyond the material, these people, they also have to be capable of having that knowledge. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to give it to us. So Shabda only makes sense to receive Shabda from a person who is spiritually qualified. And again, within the system of the Vedic culture, that person is called the Guru or the spiritual master. Because the Guru has personally realized higher subject matters, he is capable, or they are capable of speaking about them. And another source are the Shastras, or the scriptures which contain knowledge, eternal knowledge, which can address different subject matters, some of them being also beyond the material spiritual subject matters. So by the combination of Guru and Shastra, or the living person who has attained higher knowledge, and the scriptures which contain higher knowledge, we can actually acquire spiritual knowledge. Otherwise, it is very difficult. When we only try to acquire knowledge with our senses, with our intelligence, it is very difficult. Dulabham, as Srila Prabhupada quotes this Brahma Samhita verse. With the help of Guru and Shastra, it becomes possible. And the Vedic scriptures or Shastras, they are also of different types, or they deal with the different subject matters. They are a source of reliable knowledge, but they mostly deal with knowledge which is still within the material realm. And that is why Narada Muni, he wants King Prachinabarhi. The king is a Rajarshi. He is a very cultured king from ages gone, bygone ages, who actually lived by the Vedic scriptures. He performed many Vedic sacrifices to care about his kingdom and about his subjects. So he did actually follow Shastra already. He already followed Shabda, but he followed and he was attached to that part of Shastra which is still dealing with the material sphere, the material realm, the sacrifices which will enable one to go to a higher situation in the material world. And Narada Muni, he wants actually that King Prachinabarhi goes even beyond that he acquires taste for the portion of the Shastra, which is Bhagavad Shastra, which deals with transcendental subject matters and with the subject matter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. So that is why Narada Muni in this verse recommends actually to King Prachinabarhi that once you surrender actually to the process of bhakti, the Bhagavad portion of the Shastra, and once you are favored by the Lord, who bestows his mercy upon you because he's satisfied with your endeavor, and you gain some higher realization, then such a person naturally will lose taste for even the part of Shabda, or the part of the scriptures which deal with some lesser subjects. So Narada Muni says such a devotee, he naturally loses one's taste or their taste for lower subject matters and becomes attached or attracted to the happiness, the bliss he gets from higher realizations, higher spiritual realizations. So Narada Muni, he wants King Prachinabarhi to give up being attached to the materialistically motivated portion of the Vedas and solely dedicate himself to the subjects of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which are Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, which are untinged, Anyabhilashta Shunyam. They are untinged by karma and jnana, these processes of pratyaksha and anumana. And they give the highest realization and subsequently the highest satisfaction and bliss for the living entity. And that is the goal of life, to go beyond the material and become naturally very, very happy, which is not otherwise possible. So in this way, we can now go to our other topic today, which is Srimad Vacharya, because he is a very important guru in our tradition, and a person, an acharya, who gives us this Shabda Pramana, who bestows the spiritual knowledge upon us, which otherwise we would not be able to get from our sources. And as we know, an acharya is a very important type of authority, or very important type of guru, because an acharya establishes or adjusts the eternal science of bhakti yoga to a particular time and place, to a particular society, and the people who live in it, so they can actually understand the science of devotional service. At different times and in different places, people have a different capacity of understanding things, and also different ways of understanding things. And then Acharya, he tries to find a system or the explanation of Bhakti Yoga which is most conducive to the people's understanding, which is easiest for them to understand. So Madhvacharya in this way is in our tradition, our sampradaya or disciplic succession, as you certainly know, is called the Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya sampradaya. So it is a sampradaya or disciplic succession which originates from Lord Brahma, the creator of this material world, and then continues through Madhava, and then Gaudiya means through Lord Chaitanya up till present. So Madhava is a very important link. Brahma, Madhava, then Lord Chaitanya, Gaudiya, the Bengali Vaishnavas, up to present. And at the brink of Kali Yuga, when Srila Vyasadeva wrote down the Shabda Pramana, the eternal scriptures, the Vedas, which were up until that time recited only verbally, remembered and recited verbally, because people's, due to the influence of Kali, people's memory and intelligence became much reduced, so they were not able to retain in their memory the full scope of the scripture. Srila Vyasadeva, he wrote it down, so it can be passed on from a spiritual master to disciple and not lost. And we have some information about the disciplic, different branches of the disciplic succession originating from the different sampradayas, or from the different, like Lord Brahma, and Shri Lakshmi, Shri Rudra, Lord Shiva, and the four Kumaras, and also the different disciples and their successors who learned from Vyasadeva himself. But that was more than 5,000 years ago, and we don't have a full record of how these disciplic successions continued through millennia, and the links, some of them ceased to be, some of them were broken, some of them were greatly subdued, suppressed for some time, only to emerge later. So we don't have an actual clear record of how the Brahma Sampradaya, what the succession of the gurus and their disciples was throughout the last 5,000 years. So in that way, Madhava is our link to the ancient tradition. It's like a direct link, and in this way, he is the modern acharya, or the acharya who established or continued this Brahma sampradaya, this disciplic succession originating from Lord Brahma, who re-established it or continued it in the modern age, in the modern times. Because Sri Madhvacharya, he lived scholars they are not completely certain when he lived, but the date agreed upon based on some evidence from some old temple inscriptions, and based on the knowledge of the Madhava scholars themselves, the scholars in that tradition, is that he probably lived in the 13th century AD, between the years 1238 to 1317. So approximately some 750 years ago. And the information we have about Madhava, actually, usually when we speak about acharyas who lived many centuries ago, information about them and their life is quite distorted because there might not have been any reliable sources left to us. We don't know exactly when they lived or even what they did. Usually, as time goes on, there are so many new legends and local legends being developed about these personalities. So it might be difficult for us to piece together their real life, exactly when they lived, how they lived, what happened. But in the case of Madhvacharya, it is a little different, because there is one scripture, one book called the Sumadhva Vijaya, translated into English, The Great Victory of Madhva. And this book is a biography of Madhvacharya written by his grand disciple. His name was Narayana Pandita. And this Narayana Pandita, he was the son of Madhva's direct disciple, Trivikrama Pandita. I'll say a little bit more about it a little later. And I can see that it's quarter to, okay, I've been speaking for 45 minutes, so okay, we'll see how far we can go. So this Narayana,
as far as you like, Mahar. Yeah. Please.
It's okay. It's all right. I mean,
very interesting subject matter.
20 minutes, half an hour. So this Narayana Pandita, he was. It is very likely that he he saw or met Madhva when he was a young boy. He witnessed some of the later, the last portion of Madhva's life. So he was the direct witness to a number of Madhva's activities or pastimes, as we may call them, and he heard from Madhva's direct disciples and people, and those who spent a lot of time, who had a lot of personal association with Madhva. He knew them. He spent a lot of time with these devotees. So he was able to write actually Madhva's biography, which is considered to be a quite reliable source of information about Madhvacharya. So in this way, we have some information about him, which we can trust to a large degree, which might not be the case for some other ancient personalities, some acharyas and devotees about whom we know very little. So thanks to Narayana Pandita, we have a book called Sumadhva Vijaya, as I have mentioned. And this Sumadhva Vijaya is a kavya, or a poetry. It is written in verse. It is a literary genre in Indian literature which is called Mahakavya, or a great poem. And it has a number of, the total number of verses is 1008. It's quite an auspicious number, divided into 16 chapters. So this Mahakavya is like a poem, and a poem of a very high quality, because Narayana Pandita, he was born in a family of great pandits, of greatly learned brahmanas. He had a wonderful education when he was young, and he became a very prolific and very high quality writer himself, author and poet. So this Sumadhva Vijaya is written in beautiful, high-class Sanskrit, and it's really a pleasure to read it. Unfortunately, we do have a couple translations of this Madhava Vijaya into English, but none of these translations are written in very good English. It is written in what we might call, Indian English. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but it's a little bit difficult to read. But it is available online. Anybody can download these translations and read them. So basically, I will now narrate briefly, in summary, the life of the wonderful and important Acharya named Madhava, as he's being portrayed and described in the Madhava Vijaya. A very interesting thing is that in the beginning of this literary work, Narayana Pandita himself reveals the methodology which he used to gather information about Madhava. And he tells, or he claims, that he only used the stories about Madhava in his book, which he obtained from more than one, at least two reliable sources. And if those if those stories of those pastimes couldn't be confirmed by multiple sources, he did not include them in his book. And also pastimes which were kind of unclear, for which he obtained many different versions or contradicting versions, or pastimes which could be considered too confidential, he did not include in his work. So he claims that that he's being completely honest about what he writes, and what he writes has been obtained from multiple reliable sources. And that is also very interesting, because we don't always get it when we deal with biographies. Okay. So Narayana Pandita, he starts his book in the first chapter. He lays the background for Madhava's appearance. He says that actually Madhvacharya is an incarnation of Vayu, the god of the wind god, the god of air, the god of prana. And the Madhva tradition considers Vayu to be one of the principal or highest demigods, only subordinate to Brahma himself. And Vayu, as we know from other scriptures like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, he also appeared previously in the past as Sri Hanuman during Lord Ramachandra's pastimes. And then later, during Krishna's pastimes, he appeared as Bhima. So both Hanuman and Bhima were incarnations of Vayu on this earth. So Narayana Pandita, he explains, or he briefly describes the pastimes of Sri Hanuman in the service of Lord Ramachandra, and then of Bhima in the service of Krishna. And of course, these two great personalities, both Hanuman and Bhima, they helped Rama and Krishna to remove the burden of the demons, of the demoniac forces from the surface of the earth. And Narayana Pandita says that especially Bhima, he was very eager to get rid of different demons and evil spirits, so much so that he wiped out whole demoniac clans in the high mountains of the mountain ranges of Himalayas and other mountains, which are even inaccessible to us regular humans. So much so that the demons were greatly scared Bhima and contrived a plan of revenge. So Narayana Pandita says that later on in the Kali Yuga, the demons reasoned that if they appear as warriors, as kshatriyas, it might not be as effective as if they appeared as brahmanas and distorted the Vedas in such a way that no person will be able to receive any real spiritual benefit from them. So then Narayana Pandita says that these demons killed by Bhima gradually took birth again in Kali Yuga in the families of Brahmanas and started interpreting the scriptures. Either they completely rejected it in the, and propagated the Buddhist philosophy, or they distorted the Vedas and explained them in an impersonal way. They completely backgrounded the Supreme Personality of Godhead, claiming that everything is one, basically. And at the time when Madhava appeared in this world, the situation was such throughout the world, but in India specifically, that this philosophy of Advaita, especially as taught by Sri Shankara or Shankaracharya, that this philosophy was so strong and widespread that most of the other philosophies and religions, they were very much backgrounded. And the Brahmana community, even if some Brahmanas might not have fully agreed with Shankara's philosophy, the social pressure was so intense that nevertheless they still studied these impersonal scriptures and the impersonal commentaries on the Vedas, and were even teaching their sons and their disciples this Advaita philosophy. So basically the whole of India was saturated with this impersonalism, with Advaita. Although some pockets of faithful theists, of devotees remained, but they were not able to fully propagate their faith and fully practice their convictions publicly. So at this time, when the people in general had no direct access to the knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his true position and to the science of bhakti, again, the gods, the demigods, were very concerned about the well-being of the people in general. And they approached Lord Brahma to do something about the situation. And Lord Brahma, along with also Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they chose Vayu, the god Vayu, to descend to the earth and preach theism, personalism, and explain the Shastra again in a devotional way. And that Vayu appearing was Madhava. So it is described that Madhava, he was born into a traditional Brahmana family, and his parents were actually Vaishnavas. His father was a scholar learned in the Puranas and the Smriti Shastra, and also in logic. He was a logician and a teacher. And but although he was a Vaishnava at heart, again, he was teaching mostly Advaita because it was very popular at that time and sought after. His parents somehow had trouble to conceive a child, and they performed austerities for 12 years, very strict austerities to gain enough power and mercy of the Lord to get a male child. Some years before, a daughter was born to them, but then they also had a son finally. After many years, they were already quite old. They were older at that time. So it is described that the soul which was in the body inside Madhava's mother, that soul was carefully replaced by Vayu himself as he settled in the body of the baby. And after that, he was born. And he was born in South India, very near 8 miles southeast from Udupi. Udupi lies on the shore of the ocean in a very beautiful place. On this coast of India, the western coast of India, it is very fertile. It is very beautiful. You have these beautiful white beaches and forests, and immediately a few kilometers or few miles after that, there's a mountain range, the so-called the Western Ghat, and it is a very pleasant and beautiful place. So in this place lies a town of Udupi, and it is traditionally, this is a Vaishnava town, or the Vishnu or Krishna has been worshipped traditionally in this town, in this place, for a very long time. So in a village nearby to Udupi, Madhava was born in a Brahmana family. Ever since his birth, Narayana Pandita says some quite interesting, miraculous things were happening and happened. We know that Vayu, as the god of wind, is especially his attributes, his special attributes are his strength. Vayu, as the god of air, is very powerful, and he also aids digestion in the body. That's why Bhima was such a voracious eater, and Hanuman, both of them, Hanuman and Bhima, could eat great quantities of food. They had great digestion, and they were extremely strong also physically. And these are exactly the attributes which also were there in Madhava, who, even as a baby, was able to perform some amazing feats, in this respect. For example, one pastime is that his little sister stayed home alone with Madhava because the mother had to go to the marketplace to get some groceries. And Madhava became the baby. Actually, the parents gave the baby name Vasudeva. So as a child, Madhava was called Vasudeva. In the same way, like Lord Chaitanya was called Nimai as a child. So Vasudeva, or Madhava, he started crying as a baby because he was very hungry, but the mother was late and didn't come home. And he was creating so much noise that his young sister, who herself was a girl of max 6-7 years old, she became annoyed with Madhava and gave him a whole pot of cooked horse gram to eat. Now, horse gram is supposed to be, you at the farm know better than I, it's supposed to be a grain which is which is very hard to digest for a human, and is usually being served to animals, to cattle. And also, Madhava's mother cooked this horse gram in a pot to be served later to the cows. But Madhava's sister was so desperate with a crying baby, so annoyed, that she gave the whole pot to Madhava to eat. And the baby ate the whole pot of horse gram without getting any indigestion or showing some signs of overeating. So that's one pastime. And there are many others. For example, when Madhava was some 1 or 2 years old and he was barely walking, one day he caught hold of a tail of a bull, and the bull became annoyed with Madhava holding its tail and started walking around trying to escape from Madhava. But Madhava had a very tight grip on the bull, and he hung onto the bull for a whole day. And when the bull came in the evening back home from its pastures, then Madhava was still holding its tail. So it shows the extraordinary strength of the baby. And there are many such stories mentioned by Narayana Pandita about baby Madhava. So when Madhava grew up a little bit and he became a young boy, his father himself started teaching him. And he also gave him the Brahmana thread and performed the Upanayana initiation, and started teaching him not the Vedas, but he taught him the Puranas and some scriptures on logic. And Madhava, he was an excellent student. He had a very good memory. And he became unhappy when his father repeated a subject matter twice, he became very bored and told the father, please don't mention something I already know. So already from his very childhood, also the extraordinary capacity to remember things and Madhava's learning was manifested. Narayana Pandita says, of course it was manifested because he was Vayu himself, so he remembered all of the Shastra, all the knowledge from his previous life, or his identity as the demigod. He didn't have to learn anything. So then when Madhava was a little older, his father sent him to a local village school to study under a Brahmana. So Madhava started attending a Gurukula, a local Gurukula. At that time, not always all the boys had to stay at the Gurukula all the time. Madhava would, after school, he would come back home and overnight stay with his parents. But the day he spent at the Gurukula. And Narayana Pandita says that Madhvacharya, he was a very strong boy and a very restless boy also. He didn't like to study very much, but he was very eager to wrestle and fight with his classmates and to cause a lot of disturbance at school. He would be very eager to swim and wrestle and play different games, so much so that the teacher was unhappy with Madhva's disturbing his class and his teaching. So at one day he confronted Madhva and chastised him and told him, why you're playing all the time? You'll be stupid when you grow up. You'll have no knowledge. Why don't you study like the other boys? And why are you disturbing the other boys in their studies? So Madhva told him, what should I study? I already know. Anything you basically have to tell me. So the teacher didn't believe him. So then he told him, okay, recite to me this. And with the teacher, Madhava was already starting to study the Vedas proper. So the teacher told him, please recite to me this portion of the Rig Veda, the few stotras of or suktas of the Rig Veda, which we haven't studied yet, if you are so clever, if you know everything. And Madhava, of course, was able to recite these suktas to the great astonishment of the teacher. When Madhava was about 11 or 12 years old, and also opinions differ on when Madhva accepted sannyas. But Narayana Pandita claims that about the age of 11 or 12, Madhva started being very much aware of his mission to preach devotional service and try to counteract the influence of Advaita. So he stopped all his childish plays and he became very focused, and he became eager to actually find a proper spiritual master, somebody advanced in spiritual knowledge, and go and take sannyas also. So he went to Udupi, to a temple of Ananteshwara, Ananta Ishwara. It's the deity of Sri Anantadeva. There is a great ancient temple of Anantadeva in Udupi called the Ananteshwara temple. And there, Sri Madhava, he found a very learned sannyasi called Achyuta Praksha or Achyuta Preksha. And he surrendered to him and became his student. His parents had a hard time letting him go, and they tried to convince him to stay at home. And they devised different physical and psychological means to keep Madhva at home, but Madhva wouldn't let go of his idea to become a sannyasi. So eventually he actually gained the permission of both of his parents to take sannyas. He actually did not take sannyas without having the explicit permission of both his father and his mother. He still kept that Vedic culture. And but eventually he received the permission and he started studying Vedas and Upanishads under Achyuta Preksha. Narayana Pandita describes that Achyuta Preksha, similarly to Madhva's father, was not very convinced about Advaita, Vedanta, about the impersonal interpretation of the scriptures, but still he taught them and he was greatly influenced by them. So Madhva started studying under him, and very soon he became initiated into sannyas. He became a sannyasi, and he received the name Purna Prajna, Purna Prajna means one who is full or complete in knowledge, because he showed his learning even there. And as a sannyasi, very quickly, his learning grew immensely, and very quickly, it is said 4 months or the 4 months after receiving sannyasa, he started debating scholars from other traditions, from the tradition of Nyaya, Vaisheshika, from the schools of yoga, or Advaita Vedanta, or even Buddhists and Jains. And he would defeat many of these scholars in philosophical debates. So he became like a prominent disciple of Achyuta Preksha. Achyuta Preksha tried to teach Madhava Shankaracharya's commentaries, but Madhava had a great distaste for them, and he argued with his guru, with his spiritual master, trying to convince him about the personal interpretation, a theistic interpretation of the scriptures. So there was some disagreement between the spiritual master and the disciple, but still the spiritual master was quite fond of his disciple and his influence. So much so that a few years later, Madhvacharya became so, or Purna Prajna became so prominent locally that Achyuta Preksha gave him his own matha, or his own ashram. So here Madhva already established a branch of his spiritual master's school, kind of branched off and had his own establishment nearby in the forests. And there he already started teaching. He had a group of his own students, and he continued debating. Other scholars. So many other wonderful, leelas and pastimes are mentioned by Narayana Pandita about this period of time. For example, one day, Madhvacharya got the inspiration and desire to go and bathe in the Ganga, in the Ganges. And as he was in South India, Ganga was about 1,000 miles or so northwards. I'm not exactly aware of the exact geography, but many hundreds of miles to the north, and just going to the Ganga, to the Ganges, would mean that he would have to undertake a long trip and be absent from Udupi for a very long time. So his spiritual master was greatly attached to Madhva and objected to Madhva's going north. So it is described that one day Ganga came to Madhva, so he doesn't have to actually leave his spiritual master. And she manifested herself in a local pond in Udupi, and Madhva could actually bathe in Ganga without going to the actual river. So, but eventually Madhva wanted to start touring and preaching. He already had established some concepts, his own philosophy, and some concepts of the theistic or personal interpretation of the scriptures, and he wanted to teach other people. So he embarked upon a South Indian tour around South India. He was a teenager at that time, around 16 years old. And his Achyuta Preksha, his spiritual master, went with him and a few other people. And he toured all the different pilgrimages in South India, debated the local scholars, performed some miracles. For example, some Brahmanas challenged him to eat several thousand bananas. So Madhva did that. He accepted the challenge and he won the challenge. And there were a few other challenges, both physical and philosophical. So that took a few years for him. Then he went back to Udupi. And during this South Indian tour, he was encountering scholars from Southern India who did not like the fact that Madhva was preaching his own philosophy, or what they thought was his own philosophy. They said, which branch of the Vedanta do you follow? What is your disciplic succession? It seems that you just manufactured your own philosophy. And if you did manufacture your own philosophy, then it would seem natural that you would write a bhashya. It means you would establish your own branch of Vedanta. So where is your commentary on the Vedanta Sutras? Because great acharyas previously, like Shankaracharya and Ramanujacharya, they wrote their own bhashya or their own commentary on the Vedanta Sutras. And thus they established their own philosophical school, a branch of Vedanta. So Madhava was encouraged to do that. So in order to accomplish this great task and having his own philosophical school, he became inspired to actually get the blessings of Lord Narayana directly and of Vedavyasa, of Vyasadeva. So then one day Madhava embarked upon a tour to the Himalayas, and actually he went along. He already had some few disciples, so with a small group of disciples, he went north and visited the Himalayas, and he went to Badarikashrama, where he at one night they stayed in a local temple of Narayana. And at that time Madhvacharya, he only wrote one work, and that was a commentary on the Bhagavad-Gita. So at night, when others were sleeping, Madhvacharya, he recited to the deity of Lord Narayana in that temple his commentary on the Bhagavad-Gita. And Narayana Pandita says that the deity of Lord Narayana, he approved this commentary on the Bhagavad-Gita and told him, very good, this is good stuff. It is in accordance with the real purport of the Bhagavad-Gita. You did very well. So Madhava took it as a reassurance that Lord Narayana is satisfied with him and his philosophy. And at another night, Vedavyasa himself came to Madhava and invited him to come to his own ashrama, to Vyasadeva's ashrama. So then Madhvacharya, he fasted for about a month and observed complete silence to get himself spiritually, mentally, and also physically ready for a journey to the Himalayas, which are actually inaccessible for regular human beings. Because according to the Puranic cosmology, we know that what we see as our Earth is just a small portion of the actual wider Earth. And there are large portions of the Earth which are invisible to us and inaccessible to us. And the great sages and advanced living entities, they dwell in these places. So also when we go these days to the Himalayas, then we traverse the Himalayas and come out on the other side in Tibet and in China. But it is described that if we were actually qualified, we would be able to access instead a much wider portion of the Himalayas, where many different sages like Vedavyasa have their ashramas and their places. So Madhava actually then, after he performed this austerity, this tapasya, he went and visited Vyasadeva in his Badarika ashrama, in his ashrama in the Himalayas. And it was a very happy meeting, Narayana describes. They were very happy to see each other. Vayu, the demigod Vayu, in the body of Madhava and Vedavyasa, who is an incarnation of Shri Narayana or Vishnu. They had great conversations, and Vedavyasa was teaching Madhava the real purport of the Vedas, because Vedavyasa himself is the author of these Vedas, or he's the one through whom they were manifested. So in this day and age, so he taught Madhava, and he approved Madhava's way of thinking and his philosophy. And then together, Madhava and Vyasa, they went deeper into the Himalayas and actually visited Narayana, the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the Himalayas, and stayed for some time there. So then Madhava was extremely happy to see the Lord, and he was ecstatic and had long philosophical conversations with Narayana Rishi himself. And Narayana Rishi, actually the Supreme Personality of God, had instructed or gave the order to Madhava to write his own bhashya or his own commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, so he could establish his own philosophical school. So then after a few months, Madhava went back down the Himalayas, back to his disciples who were waiting for him in the meantime. And there on the slopes of the Himalayas, he wrote his own bhashya or his own commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, and officially established Dvaita Vedanta, his own school of thought, his theistic interpretation of the Vedas. And that's where the Madhava portion of our sampradaya originates from. So we belong to this school also. And then Madhava, on the way back to South India, toured many different places. He met different local scholars. He defeated many Brahmanas and many others, scholars in the philosophical debate. He acquired many disciples, some of them very prominent, and he came back to Udupi. And I will only finish now the class summarizing the rest very briefly. Madhava afterwards stayed in Udupi, and he became quite renowned. He became quite famous. And many people sought shelter of him, and he became the spiritual master of many brahmacharis. He initiated a number of sannyasis also as his disciples. But he had also disciples among grahasthas and even among lower castes such as Vaishyas and Shudras. Although in his school, in the Madhava school in South India, they still follow very strictly this division of Varnashrama. So Brahmanas don't mix with the other castes. But Madhvacharya himself, he had disciples from all the castes, different Varnas, and ashramas also. So it is described that Madhava, a few years later, he went and visited Vedavyasa and Narayana again in the Himalayas. So he made 2 tours to the north in total during his life. And during his second trip, he had a much larger group of disciples follow him on his North Indian tour. It seems like that during this time also the political landscape in India changed considerably, because we know that already during Madhva's time, the south was still ruled by Hindu kings, but the north was already conquered by the Muslims. But somehow during his first visit, it seems like he did not have much trouble, but on his second North Indian tour, on numerous occasions, he got into conflict with Muslims or some robbers or bandits. And it seems that his trip was much more dangerous. And during this trip, he also performed a number of miracles to save his disciples, protect his disciples. He walked across water, the Ganges, together with his disciples, so they don't have to swim over. He beat up whole groups of bandits and robbers, etc., etc. So he had extraordinary strength. During his second North Indian tour, he also accepted many philosophical challenges from representatives of different philosophical schools. He visited places like Kurukshetra, where he is said to have found on the battlefield of Kurukshetra Bhima's club, because in his previous life he was Bhima himself. So he remembered exactly where he left or lost his club after the battle of Kurukshetra, and he found it again, showed it to his disciples, and there are many pastimes, similar pastimes described by Narayana Pandit. After his second North Indian tour, Madhava was already quite advanced in age, so he did not tour further very much, just very locally around Udupi in that area. During this time, he also established the deity of Krishna in the Udupi temple. So it's also very beautiful, interesting pastimes. When you go to Udupi today, you will be able to see this beautiful Madhava Udupi temple and a beautiful deity of Krishna in the main shrine. And this deity is said to have been established by Madhava himself. And the story goes as such that one day Madhava was meditating on the shore of the ocean in Udupi when there was suddenly a very strong storm. And he saw in the distance a merchant ship struggling in the wind and in the rain. And the ship was about to crash on some cliffs. So Madhava used his upper garment as sort of a lighthouse, and somehow he managed to guide the ship to safety to a local harbor. And the ship was actually coming from Dwaraka, from Gujarat, across the ocean to South India. And the captain of the ship, he was so grateful to Madhava for saving him and his cargo, that he offered that Madhava could have anything he wished from his ship. So Madhava just said that the captain should give him one very large chunk of Gopi Chandan or tilak from Dwaraka. So it was a massive, huge Dwaraka, chunk of Dwaraka Tilak. And it is described that many men were needed to carry this chunk. So on the shore, Madhava, he broke this chunk of tilak, and inside this tilaka was the deity of Krishna, which then Madhava installed. He built a temple for the deity, and this deity is today still worshipped as Udupi Krishna, and is worshipped very beautifully. So Madhava was staying in Udupi. He was teaching. He was debating his adversaries, and he gained great affluence. During this time, Narayana Pandita describes that he was becoming so famous that the Advaitins or the Mayavadis started to be quite threatened by him, because Madhava had some influence with some local monarchs, and at that time different ashramas or philosophical schools were subsisting to a large degree on the donations by local administration, by the local monarchs and maharajas. So Advaitins, they also felt that their influence was diminishing in South India. So they contrived a plan to steal Madhava's library, to steal his writings. And they managed to do so. At night, they plundered his library and stole his manuscripts and his writings, along with his whole library. It said that Madhava had a very large, extensive library. So, but the library was later retrieved with the help of a local king. He was a follower and admirer of Madhvacharya. So towards the very end of his life, Madhava, disconnected to the past time when he was retrieving his library, he arrived at one kingdom which was nearby, a few dozen miles away from Udupi. There was a local Maharaja who was King Jayasimha, who was an admirer of Madhava, and he invited Madhava to stay with him for some time. So at that time, the court scholar of King Jayadeva, of Jayasimha, was Trivikrama Pandit, and he was a great scholar and the most learned person in that area, in that vicinity. And he was at that time he was an Advaitin, he was a Mayavadi. And it is described that he had an 18-day-long philosophical discussion with Madhava, after which he became Madhava's disciple. And these last few chapters of the Sumadhva Vijaya, Madhava is being his daily routine, Madhava's appearance, his disciples, and the discussion of Madhava with Trivikrama is being described in such a great detail, in such a vivid detail with everything, how Madhava worshipped his deity. He carried shalagram shilas with him and worshipped them every day. This worship is being described in great detail. Also Madhava's sadhana from morning to night. And also this philosophical discussion with Trivikrama. So it appears that Narayana Pandita, the author of Madhava's biography, was present during that time already. And he was directly a personal witness to the events of the conversion of his father and Madhava being there. So just before Madhava left his body, actually, it's not correct to say that way, but toward the very, very end of his life, Madhava established 8 madhas, or 8 monasteries situated around the Udupi temple. And he appointed 8 of his sannyas disciples as pontiffs of these 8 madhas, or 8 monasteries. And these madhas were to ensure that the puja or the worship of Udupi Krishna, of the deity of Krishna, goes on uninterruptedly. So that practice goes on to this day. When you go to Udupi, you will see these 8 madhas around the Udupi temple, and they take turns in worshiping the deity. During Madhva's time, I believe that it was every 2 months that they were changing, and now they are changing every 2 years. I have a feeling, if I'm not mistaken. And Madhva, he wrote altogether 37 works. Most important of them are his commentary of the Brahma Sutras, He wrote 2 commentaries on the Bhagavad-Gita. He also commented on the Srimad Bhagavatam and Mahabharata. So in this way, he very prominently established, again, or re-established the Bhagavad Dharma, or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of God at Bhakti Yoga in India. Until then, we are told that it was very much suppressed, but Madhava and his efforts greatly contributed to counteract the influence of impersonalism and the gradual rise of personalism in India and Bhakti, which then was steadily gaining in the subsequent centuries strength until during Lord Chaitanya there was a complete explosion of Krishna Bhakti in India and in that area of the world. So it seems like this real very courageous and very strong push against impersonalism started in the modern era with the efforts of Madhava. And it is very likely that that is the reason also why Lord Chaitanya chose to be part of this sampradaya and not, for example, some other Vaishnava sampradayas. This strong, staunch devotion of Madhava to Krishna, to his personal view of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and his staunch rejection of impersonalism. So yeah, here Madhava is a very prominent acharya for us, although we have to mention that there are a few philosophical points which he differs in from the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but there are no differences whatsoever in their conviction that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Vishnu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that we are his eternal, the living entities are his eternal servants. And there is an eternal loving relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the Jiva. And in some subtle philosophical points or some other philosophical points, there might be some differences. But overall, we agree on the basics. So I would like to end the class here. I already talked much longer than I was anticipating, but that's how it goes. And I thank very much from the bottom of my heart to everybody who listened today. And thank you so much. And Hare Krishna. Hope to see you again.
Hare Krishna, dear Maharshi Prabhu. Thank you very much for enlightening us today and giving us such a deep description of Madhvacharya life and teaching and pastimes, especially that it's coming from the authorized source, such as this biography of Narayana Pandit. I really enjoyed listening to it. I hope all of our attendees also have the mutual same feeling. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if any devotees would like to say something, or maybe ask a question, if we still have like 5 minutes or so, please do so. We have Tarka Prabhu here, is Prabhupada disciple, one of the most senior devotees here in the community. So.
I'm very sorry. I don't mean to be impolite, but is it the Taraka Prabhu I met in Greece many years ago, or no?
I'm not sure we've met before. There may be some other Tarakas here and there, but
yes. Okay, I'm sorry.
I want to thank you very much for a wonderful class. It was a wonderful meditation. Very nicely done. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu, very much.
Sure. My pleasure. Okay. Venu-Madhurya Prabhu, I'll ask your kind permission to.
Yes, I know that you have probably lunch waiting for you now.
That's not a problem. I think it's
our time for breakfast, yours for lunch.
Yeah, that's how it is. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you. Please pay our obeisances to your good wife and little Neela. Hope she's
Yeah.
healthy and everything is well.
Thank
Okay,
you very
thanks a lot.
much for the class.